So I've read a lot of manga, like really a lot. It's probably around a decade that I've been reading, maybe just a little less. So I've had plenty of time to check out the entire scope of manga, from massive mainstream titles to obscure series that may or may not even have an official translation in English. When you've taken in that much content, it gets to a point where things sort of struggle to stick out in your mind or leave like a lasting impression of sorts. So I go through dry spells of not finding anything like that pretty often. Sometimes I'll read more than 100 chapters of different series with nothing. It gets pretty frustrating, I'm not gonna lie, but with that being said, it almost makes finding those series that really do strike a chord with me feel more rewarding. These are some series that did exactly that, series that managed to feel different from the hundreds of others I've read. The Fable is without a doubt the best crime manga I've ever read, and yet it doesn't get talked about very much, or at least not as much as I think it deserves. The plot follows a hitman whose skill is so legendary and unbelievable that his existence is basically a myth in Japan's underworld. After a period of completing missions with many casualties, his boss orders him into hiding to keep a low profile. Not only is our main character an assassin who leads an insane lifestyle, he's also a very strange individual. He's very blunt, has practically no social skills or social awareness, and has some odd comedic tendencies, and a fascination with a comedian who is widely recognized as a hack, pretty much. Later on in the series, we learn more about his upbringing, and upon learning of it, his bizarre personality makes perfect sense. Now, I won't spoil it, you'll have to read and find out, but it's pretty cool, and adds another layer to this fascinating character, which he really is fascinating. He's very unpredictable, but his way of thinking completely rationalizes his crazy actions. Now, that's not to say he's the only good character, because pretty much the whole cast is great and extremely memorable. It is a crime manga, so you're primarily dealing with Yakuza-type characters who are absolutely criminals and do some horrible things, yet manage to have complex morals despite that. Not necessarily bad. The cast is very morally great, even the antagonists, who are written brilliantly, so there's a lot of nuance in how these characters operate. The Fable has fantastic art and action sequences that flow incredibly well. Oftentimes, chapters will be almost entirely textless, solely focusing on showing each movement in great detail. It really does make for some fantastic fights, but to me the best part of the series is the story of our main character, how he changes after integrating into society, going from merciless killer to someone incredibly thoughtful. This series is seriously incredible, and I strongly suggest you check it out, especially if you like crime manga. You won't be disappointed, I promise. Doro is one of the most unique things I've ever read, and it's actually a manga that I dropped a while back but picked up again recently. The only reason I never finished it is because I got into a series called The Dark Tower by a little known writer called Stephen King. You might have heard of him, maybe not, but Dark Tower completely consumed my life at the time. I couldn't read anything else. Dark Tower video coming soon, by the way, stay tuned. But Doro is something I plan on getting back into, definitely. I felt I had to finish it, especially after a couple glowing recommendations. And I did remember enjoying what I read of it. It's just, again, when something so massive like the Dark Tower consumes your life, it's hard to read other shit. So when I picked it up again, it just gripped me. Its art style is super gritty and dark, with a lot of lines and details. It's unlike pretty much every other manga I've read in that way. It stands completely on its own. It also has consistently amazing character designs. The author strikes a great balance between weird and cool, and there's always a lot of detail put into them. For example, there are characters whose primary way of combat stems from their fingers, so you often see people from this group of characters with scars on their hands indicating their fingers had been cut off in battle. I love that attention to detail. It's subtle, but it adds a sense of realism to the world despite it being so crazy that really makes it feel lived in. The story takes place in two major settings to the point I've read up to. There's the Sorcerer's World, where, you guessed it, magic users live, and there's Hole, a decrepit city whose inhabitants are under constant attack from the magic users. Magic users come to Hole to test out their powers on the people living there. It's kinda fucked up, I'm not gonna lie. This has been happening pretty much forever, and these attacks are exactly what has caused not only the city, but also the people to deteriorate seriously. The main plot of the story follows a victim of one of these magic attacks, Kaiman, whose head has been transformed into a lizard. Along with that, he's lost his memory, and inside his body exists a man. Yeah, it's wild, but basically Kaiman hunts down magic users, stuffs their head in his mouth, and lets the man inside take a look at them to determine if they were the one who used their ability on Kaiman. It's absolutely absurd, in the best way possible. That mystery is an instant hook and a great driving force. The series so far has done a great job of building up the mysteries that make me want to keep reading, like I really cannot put it down whenever I pick it up. It's a truly fantastic series so far. I really need to finish this ASAP. So if anything I've said sounds interesting to you, which it really should because holy crap, what an absurd plot, then please check it out. This series is one of the more brutal ones I've ever read. Monkey Peak follows a group of co-workers, the boss of which decided a company retreat would be the type of morale boost they needed after their company faced some major controversy. Things don't go quite as planned, as during the very first night of the trip, some members of their group are attacked and brutally slaughtered by a monster monkey. So this series is chock full of graphic death scenes, so if you're a sicko who enjoys that kind of stuff, you'll love it, I'm sure. As I mentioned, the group of characters are on a trip, and it's actually a hiking trip and they're going up a mountain. The further they progress, the more dire their situation becomes as the number of monkeys increase and the terrain becomes more difficult to navigate. Now, I know a bunch of monkeys doesn't seem that terrifying. Actually, it seems pretty silly, right? But the design of these monkeys and the way they're utilized is bone-chilling. Since they're animals, they have extreme physical capabilities and can navigate the rugged terrain far easier than the people can. This puts our cast of characters in very tough spots consistently, ones that have very real consequences, as there is almost certain to be at least one casualty per encounter with the monkeys. The very high death count this series has, the terrifying force pushing the story forward, and the grueling setting with fierce weather conditions creates a high-tension reading experience that always had me at the edge of my seat. Monkey Peak isn't lacking in the character department either. It has a mixed bag of likable and extremely detestable characters. Even the motivations of those detestable characters make sense, despite them being very annoying at times and downright enraging at others. It can be a frustrating read, but I found that the conflicting viewpoints and the discussion of them, which often gets muddled up because of the chaos, really adds to the already tremendous tension, and sometimes lead to very unexpected plot twists. I don't see this series get talked about almost at all, really, like I haven't even seen a single video on it, but it's a really solid read and definitely worth your time. Where do I even begin with this manga? Dragon is a very out there series, I'll just say that. It has a lot of really wacky stuff, a lot of very gratuitous scenes and plot points, but the iffy stuff it more than makes up for with amazing characters, a gripping, emotional story, and absolutely stunning art, with fights that completely blew my mind when I read them. There's a very wide array of powers, none of which are unoriginal and always fit perfectly with the characters who use them, because in this story, powers are a direct manifestation of the user's desires. The plot of the story begins with our main character, a police officer with very questionable morals, who gets infected by a frog. As weird as that sounds, just stick with me. The frog turns him into what's known as a fractured human, which is a being that, like I mentioned, has their desires manifest into a supernatural ability. Our main character's ability is growing a massive gun on his hand that fires blasts of power. He meets an owl that tells him to hunt down all the other fractured humans to get a wish. That's the gist of it. It sounds completely absurd, I know, but that's the beauty of it. Within this absurd story of very questionable, gratuitous material exists some truly beautiful character arcs that may or may not have made me shed a tear or two. It has phenomenal side characters whose stories are just as, honestly, if not more compelling, heartfelt, and interesting as the main characters. Now, that's not to say the main character is bad, not at all. It's just that his personality may be a little hard to connect with. But his development is great and very clearly depicted on the page, because as we see his desires change, so too do his powers as the two are intertwined. Dragon is not a series I recommend to anyone new to manga, but if it's not your first rodeo and you've seen the depths of manga weirdness, then you should feel right at home, and will probably be shocked by the extent of craftsmanship behind the story, specifically the art. Seriously, the art is such a treat in every aspect. Paneling, composition, detail, choreography, it has everything going for it, as well as an art style that's simply cool as hell. So check out Dragon if any of that seemed pretty interesting. Like I said at the beginning, I've read plenty of manga. You name it, I've honestly probably read it. These are just a couple ones I've read more recently that stood above everything else I've read in the past year or so. I wouldn't say any of these are my favorites, maybe top 10 for one and great potential for another, but for the most part they're all more modern series that I feel are great and deserve some shine. There were a handful of other series I wanted to include in this video but didn't for one reason or another, so maybe I'll make a second recommendation video if this one does well. Lord knows I do have a lot of series and opinions to share, so until next time.